Welcome to Mamas in Spirit, a podcast pointing you towards God in everything you are and everything you do. I'm Lindy Wynn, and it's a blessing to be with you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this gathering of Mamas in Spirit. As I've shared before, Mamas in Spirit is a mini retreat and a podcast. It's really an opportunity and an invitation for us to dig really deep in our hearts and into our lives so that we can open ourselves to the work of the Lord and the work of the Holy Spirit and how God redeems. God is always at work redeeming us and redeeming the world. Praise God. And today I'm so excited to be here with Erica Campbell from Be a Heart. Erica, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it is a blessing, and I am so excited to hear your story. I'm so looking forward to it. But before we get to that, could you please open us in prayer?
Yeah, definitely. Wherever you are and whatever you're doing, if you can take a deep breath, the breath that the Spirit enters our body and renews us with each one that we take, hundreds and thousands a day, that God enters our being here and now. We invite the Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit. Renew us, strengthen us, give us grace in all that we're doing, in all of the things that we have on our mind, our to-do list, our worries, our joys. May we be aware of your presence. We know that you are already here, not just in our inviting, but you exist whether we recognize it or not. So today, in all that we do, in this next hour, in this time, and beyond this time, may we notice you. May we turn our eyes and our hearts towards you, that we can hear your voice, that we can be your love in this world. Come, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Erica, for that beautiful prayer. And I love the glorious reminder that God is always with us, whether or not we invite the Lord into our awareness or we're aware or not. God is always there. God is omnipresent and always with us. So, Erica, in that spirit, I would love for you to share your story and how you have really discovered God at work and present in your life.
Yeah. It's a good invitation. And for me, it's always a blessing to have to go back and see where God was working. And one of the things that I was talking to my spiritual director about a couple of months ago, because I was like, I don't feel God. I'm like drowning in motherhood and running a business. And he kind of chuckled and was like, you never, let me remind you that you kind of never see God, and it's only in looking back in your life that you've been able to see how he was moving and how he was working, and that can give you enough hope that he is still working today, even if you can't see it. So for me, in equally drowning in sick kids and running a business, and I have this to-do list that just never seems to get checked off, so I really appreciate that. And so I will really try to succinctly tell the story of this. I grew up Catholic. My family is Catholic, Irish Catholic, on both sides, and grew up going to church. My parents faithfully took us to religious education. We went to mass every Sunday. We prayed before our meals. And I always say I was inclined toward the spiritual life. I enjoyed going to church and praying, singing and all of that. And so when I made it to high school, I really fell into youth group with Life Teen. I grew up in Phoenix, where Life Teen had started, and it was a place that I really felt like I belonged, and I had friends, and it was a really good experience. And I, it was where I learned about adoration. And when I look back on that time and going through really difficult things in my family life, in my home, I had it as a refuge. And I remember I was recently thinking about, I read The Story of a Soul by Saint Therese, and I would read it in adoration. We had a chapel that wasn't too far from our house. And I was a teenager who felt a lot, and I was like, am I called to the religious life? Like, I think anyone who reads that book feels like, what does that mean? And, like I really was someone who was seeking to follow God's will and what that meant. And I preface all of this for like what happens in my story. But even like I didn't go to junior prom. My friends were going and I didn't go. And I remember I spent like 4 hours in adoration. And I just, um, there was a deep longing for God. And it was, I can say like maybe some mental illness too. And like having to, like, I had so much anxiety, like I had to turn to God in that. It was like my only, trying to think of the right word, like refuge, really. I like to get out of my house, to get out of my head, all of those things. So my senior year, I met someone who had come to do a retreat at our church, and he was recruiting for a school in Indianapolis, and they had a program that would be like a scholarship program to pay for school. And I'll kind of fast forward through this. I go to Indianapolis. It's a really small school. I'm like first time out of my community, thinking I'm going to find community there. God has called me to this. And it ended up being kind of a commuter school. At that time, it no longer really is, but everyone would go home to their small towns, and I'd be the only one left in my dorm. And I got really depressed. It was a really hard season. It was like, I was from Arizona where we didn't have snow. It was like a long winter, and I was really miserable. And so I got really resentful of God. And I was like, how could you do this to me? Like I thought I was following you, and you have abandoned me here. And so I, at that time, thought to myself, well, I really tried to follow him, and this is where it led me. So I'm going to try a different way. Like everyone else who is not trying to follow God looks like they are having a better life than me. So I ended up transferring schools to a school in Chicago, and I graduated, but it was a really rough time. And it was the first time that I started drinking, and I liked the way that it felt. I could get out of myself a little bit, like, what I was looking for was, it was a medicine for me, in that. But my life, kind of spiraled out at that time. I'll say, like, there was just a lot. I mean, yes, I was a college student, but I wasn't drinking like other people. And I, come from a family where alcoholism is very prevalent. I think like many of our families, many Catholic families, like, we have alcoholics. And I had, up to that point, had never touched it because I had seen what it had done to people. And then when I first had my first drink, I was like, okay, this is solving a lot of issues. Like, no wonder people do this. And so, a couple years into college, I was miserable. The life that I thought, I did not find. It did not solve my depression. It increased it. And I will say too, in all of this, because I think we can identify, like, it wasn't that I quit completely going to church. I mean, that was part of my identity. It is what I knew to do. So it was me going to mass on Sundays, a lot of tears, just feeling like I was far from myself. I was far from God, and I didn't quite know how to get out of it. And so when I was graduating from college, I was going to the night before I was going to go for a grad school interview. I I couldn't sleep. And I remembered this brochure that I had picked up at uh, it was a summer retreat, like a big conference, it was for college students, but it was a big conference. And I had gone and I picked up this brochure, and it was some kids running in like a dirt street. And it was a volunteer program. And I had taped it to my desk at my parents' house. So I thought to myself that night, if I don't go and do this now, if I don't go and help people like I once longed to do, um, then I'm never going to do it. Like, I'm going to get into grad school. I kind of had the plan, like, get in grad school, get married, have kids. Like, when would I ever do this? And so I bombed my interview the next day because wasn't in it. And I called my mom and I was like, can you tell me what that says? Like, what is the organization? So I looked it up. It's called Heart's Home, and I applied for it. And you had to go for like a little weekend, like a come and see weekend, to see if it was a good fit on both ends. And like, I just remember laughing, like everyone had their rosaries, like everyone was really prepared, and I was not. Like, I just showed up there as I was in all my brokenness, like, I haven't prayed a rosary in ages. Are they gonna know that I like am an imposter? Like, is this the right fit? Like, do they know what like who I am? And that Sunday, so their house is in Brooklyn in New York, and they live their mission in New York as well, and then in a lot of different countries around the world. So we kind of live their life with them. The whole concept is they fashion themselves after Mary at the foot of the cross. So the compassion that happens of your presence, it's a ministry of presence. And it's really about visiting people who are lonely, who don't have anyone who's going to visit them. So maybe it's in a nursing home and their family can't make it often, or they don't have family, and you go and you just spend 30 minutes with them. And the idea is that in your presence, like, you bring Christ to people. It's not about doing these grand things. And I think I identified with it. I felt called to it because of the loneliness that I had experienced in my own life. So I was like, I don't know about this. Like, I don't know if I'm, if I could even do this. And the Sunday mass that we all went to before it was ending, the weekend was ending, had the song "Come and Follow Me," I will give you rest. And it was just a moment where I was like, okay, like, I will do this. Like, I am not good at leading my own life, and I learned a long time ago to trust you. And I think this is my only chance to get out of where I am right now. And I thought that if I just learned how to love better, that I wouldn't, if I just learned to love better, then I wouldn't I wouldn't fall into these things. We can call them sin, we can call them, whatever it is, but I thought this would save me. So fast forward, I moved to Brazil. I was just out of college, and I lived in a community of about 40 people. We lived in the middle of the forest in Brazil, outside of a favela, which is like a shanty town. And we had a chapel. I shared a bedroom with a Lebanese sister for a year and a half, and there were children who lived with us who, they weren't orphans. We knew their parents, but their parents were incapable of caring for them. Maybe they were drug addicts, or they were just so impoverished themselves. And so in our different houses, we had kind of like, we had a big community, and then we had little communities made of priests, sisters, volunteers like myself from all over the world, and then Brazilian people. So our lives are really centered around prayer. We prayed morning prayer and evening prayer. We prayed the rosary every day. We had to do an hour of adoration every day. And then we each had our different assignments. And then we would go to the nearby favela to visit people. But that wasn't, in Brooklyn, they did that every day. For us, I think we had 1 or 2 days that we would do that. And go and just visit a lot of elderly people or sick people. And it, I mean, it changed everything about me. I mean, when you experience that kind of, um, two things, you experience that kind of poverty, um, changes the way that you see your American life. And when you live a life of prayer like that, where your rhythm is prayer, that will change everything about you as well. So it was extremely difficult. I always say it was the most difficult and beautiful thing that I ever experienced, except that now I will say I think motherhood beats it out, um, because it is probably more challenging and, beautiful. They're equally beautiful in different ways, but motherhood is currently in just a season of difficulty. Um, and the kids changed me. I think when you think you're going to go help people and really it is them helping you. I was young and I had a lot of ideas of what that would mean. And they were a real gift to me. And a lot of healing happened, and who I am. Um, but then I came back, and the reality of going on any kind of mission, whether you go on a week trip that a lot of people do, or you go for a year and a half, and you come back to your regular life, in quotes, you're still met with yourself. And I think one of the issues of that is like it was just such a different way of living that like had nothing to do with my life in the US. And so it was much more difficult in returning to the US than it was going to Brazil. Other than, of course, like I got 1 hour of internet a week if the internet dial up was working, which it didn't work a lot because it was super rainy and so there was like the part of missing my family, that was hard, and learning a new language. No one spoke English, so I learned to speak Portuguese and all of that. But coming back to the US and being 24 and having a hard time identifying with other people my age, because now I had just lived this very intense experience. So I moved to Brooklyn. I actually moved into the house, of Heart's Home in Brooklyn, because I did not know where to go, what to do. I had a degree in sociology, and it was kind of like you go back and you have to find a job and all of that. So I moved in and rented a room from them and became a nanny as I was just trying to figure things out. And a lot of that was just like, I don't know what I'm doing with myself. And I actually really loved nannying, even though, when you're 24, you think like, I can't do this forever. I have to get a real job. I have to get like a salaried position. I don't know. I had this idea that I like needed to, wear business suits. Like I bought a bunch of business suits when I came back from Brazil, because I thought that's like what people in New York did. And I was living there, and I think, for anyone who knows anything about what alcoholism looks like, whether you, try to get sober or quit drinking, is that, you kind of pick up where you left off. So there isn't a lot. It's not like you go back to ground zero and then like kind of progress into maybe the same disease. It's kind of like you start where you left off. And because I hadn't, identified it, right, I didn't know that I was an alcoholic. I just thought I was a college student drinking. Well, now I was in New York City, where bars stayed open until 4, and I, no matter what I did to try and not drink so much, I continually found myself, uh, drinking too much, and not in a way. It's difficult. I'm so used to talking to other alcoholics to kind of get it, but like, I wasn't. I'm not like a class at like what so much of us like in society we think of like alcoholics as carrying like a brown paper bag and drinking all the time. It wasn't that. It was that when I drank, on the weekends, I drank much more than I ever intended to. I would say that I was no longer going to drink. I wasn't, if I got drunk the night before, okay, I'm not going to drink tomorrow night, and then find myself in the same situation. And so it was harder to identify it as this disease because I wasn't drinking every day. In the beginning, eventually it did progress to that. But I really felt that I was broken goods, and I was not holy enough. And if I had just been more faithful, or if I really believed in God, then I wouldn't keep doing this. And not just drinking, but the behavior that came from drinking of, finding myself waking up to men who I didn't know, or, a lot of the things that I felt so much shame about because I was outwardly, people thought I was so great. And it was kind of this dual life. Like, I'm living this and I'm doing this, and I don't know how to,
Reconcile.
I don't know how to, obviously they didn't combine. And so then there's a lot of, I was just living in so much shame. And then the shame was fueling the alcoholism. And I was trying to be holier and go to adoration and do all of these things and like pray it away, So I'm in Brooklyn. I decide for Lent that year that, like, okay, if I go back to daily mass, maybe I will be transformed. And so I started going to the morning mass at the like downtown Brooklyn church. And I go up to the priest after mass in tears, like, could you do confession for me? He's like, all right, come on back. And I just break down, and I'm telling him, just like in so much shame, my deepest secrets. And he looked at me, he's like, do you have a spiritual director? I was like, I don't, I need one. And he said, okay, come back next week at the same time. We'll meet for an hour. So I was like, okay, I'll be back. And in a lot of ways, going to daily mass did change my life, because that priest is still my spiritual director. His name is Father Michael, and he has walked me through so much. He's a very practical priest. So for me, I always felt like if I just prayed or I just did this, like, then there was going to be like a magical experience of it. And what he really taught me is that God works in reality and in the tangible things that aren't so like spiritual. It doesn't have to be spiritualized. So to explain that, I mean, there were a couple things going on, a couple of ideas that I had picked up along the way, that, like, I really thought that if and this fueled some of my drinking. I thought, well, I just gave a year and a half of my life. I didn't make any money. I was away from my family. I did this wonderful thing. I've come back. I can't find a job. I had started dating this guy who then just like abruptly broke up with me, who I thought was perfect. Like he was the perfect Catholic guy and all of these things. And I was upset. I was resentful again. Like, I did this thing and you did not give me what I wanted. And so one of the biggest lessons for me was, I've shared this recently with my own community. Father Michael was like, so God is not Santa, and God does not have a magic wand, and it's not like a genie where like you make your wish and you get it. It's not a probably the thing that changed me the most was learning and understanding that our relationship with God is not transactional, it's transformational. So it's not like I give you this, like I did a good deed, so now you give me back one of my wish list items. That really, the point of our relationship with God is to transform our hearts. And that doesn't have anything to do with like, being a young person, a young woman in the church, especially, is like finding a husband, having kids, job, like all of these things that really don't have to do with my relationship with God. So, so that kind of shifted my perspective. And then Father Michael said to me pretty early on, like, hey, so like all of your issues are stemming from you drinking. Like what if you quit drinking? I was like, well, I can't quit drinking. Like I won't have any friends. I won't have a social life. I can't possibly do that. And also I don't have an issue. He's like, okay, it's fine. So then 6 months later, something happened and I was like, I think I might have an issue. Like, he must be right. Like this, this family disease has me. And it isn't that I am completely broken or incapable or not holy enough. It is an actual disease. And the good news is that there's help for it. And I was really afraid of what life would look like because I didn't know. It's so silly. I really was worried about what would happen at my wedding if I couldn't drink. Like, I don't know why, I was so stuck on these things, right? But like people get married and there's alcohol, and like, what do you do if you can't drink? Fast forward, I had a beautiful wedding. I did not have any alcohol, and that was just like not a requirement. And actually probably had a better time without it. So I ended up getting into AA, and it is a huge part of my story because I don't think I would be here without it. I know that I would not be. I like to explain it, especially with mental health things like, in AA, it is a spiritual program. So like, it's not that I don't need prayer. It actually is centered around prayer, but it's kind of like if you go to like your general practitioner, right? Like they can kind of help you. But then when you have a bigger issue, they refer you out to a specialist. And for me, AA, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, is the specialist for the particular ailment that I have in my body and spirit, and what I need. And so that was a huge, it was everything for me. And it was really difficult and it wasn't easy. And so I was just thinking about this because I saw someone on Facebook who I had started to like talk to, and I met him at this big Catholic event, and he was really handsome and very exciting, and I told him that I was going to quit, that I was quitting drinking, and that kind of ended it. Like my biggest fear of like quitting drinking was not going to be accepted because so much of our culture can revolve around it, and I look back and I am really grateful to not have that there's so much goodness in it. So that was in 2013, November 2013, when I quit my last drink. So November 13th, 2013. And it's kind of crazy. It's going to be like 10 years next year. So almost 9 years, if I can get there. I think I can. And so it was winter time in New York, and I still was left with a lot of anxiety, right? Like I drank to kind of solve that anxiety in the evenings after work. Like I was working to school, come home, like I could just have a couple of beers to just like make that feeling go away. So all of a sudden I still had anxiety, and I decided I needed to do something else that would be like a meditative experience. And because I always liked doing like crafty things, and I knew from I had traveled through Europe, and I knew that, and actually in Heart's Home we talk a lot about how beauty can like revive your soul and your spirit. So I said, okay, I live in a small apartment with some roommates. I cannot make a mess every single night. I need something that I could like get out and then I could put it away like in the same night. So I remember that my mom had taught me calligraphy as a kid, and I decided to teach myself how to do calligraphy. And it was a really slow experience. It was kind of before, it was like right at the beginning of the hand lettering craze when everyone started doing hand lettering. And so there weren't a lot of resources in how to do it. So in the evenings, I would teach myself how to do it. And I always tell people when I started teaching calligraphy classes a couple years later, it's really meditative because you can kind of get out of your head and you have to go slow. You have to slow down. If you don't slow down with it, you will, like the ink will splatter everywhere. So for me, it was a way to kind of connect to myself, to my soul, and to God through doing that. And I would letter different Bible verses or quotes that were inspiring me. And it's really funny. It has nothing to do with my story, except that it's hilarious. Like I was using the wrong side of the pen for like 6 months, and like it didn't matter, because for me, it was the experience of doing it in a way to heal. And so then that year in December, so a couple weeks later, I remembered the St. Andrew's novena. And my grandmother had given it to me for my confirmation years earlier on a little note card that my great grandmother had written. And so it was in her beautiful handwriting, the St. Andrew novena prayer, and framed it. And I remembered it randomly. I think I must have heard about it somewhere. And I was like, I think I have that. So my mom sent me a picture again of the frame that was in my bedroom back home. And I prayed it that Christmas or that Advent season. You pray it from the 27th, I believe, is St. Andrew's feast day, until Christmas Day. 15 times you repeat this prayer. And it said that Mary will give you the desire of your heart, which for me, obviously going back to like, you don't want to demand something, but I thought, I just need something. I really needed help with the direction of my life, where I was going to work. I was miserable at work. What was I going to do? So I was praying this prayer for direction in like my work vocation. And I had this idea in it. I'm praying it every day, and I thought I could be a calligrapher. And I didn't know what calligraphers did, and I didn't know how they made money on doing that. But I thought, hey, I know it's a job. So actually, I told that guy who told me, was not that interested after I was going to quit drinking, about this thought that I had. And he kind of laughed. I mean, he didn't kind of laugh. He laughed. He said, oh, what are you going to do? Ride your bike around with like a sign that says like calligrapher on the back? Because I would ride my bike a lot. And I was like, okay, he's not supportive of this. And I also didn't know what it was. So I kind of let it go. And I tell that because I became a calligrapher, and it was really the beginning of my business as it stands now. And I had a blog called Be a Heart because it was pulled from a reading from when I was doing Heart's Home. That was like our call to our mission: be a heart, nothing but a heart. And so the blog was, when I was in Brazil, I would write about what I was doing, so people like my sponsors could read about it. And then I kept it up when I was living in New York, because the idea of like, how can you be a heart in your regular life? Like figuring out the mission trip is only so good as like how it can translate and change who you are. So I started sharing about my calligraphy, and my brother, people were like, you could like make a business out of this. So I started an Etsy shop, and that was 2014. I decided that I did not like New York and wanted to move somewhere sunnier. So I moved to Los Angeles, and one of my best friends was living there, who also did Heart's Home. She was in Austria, and she was living there. I was like, you chose the better place. So I moved there, and I was just hitting my head against the wall and trying to find a job. I was doing calligraphy on the side, but I really didn't think you could make money doing that so much. So I tried out wedding planning at this amazing, the best in the business out in LA. And I had a really hard time with the excess that was created in the wedding industry, having been, I'm like 2 years out of living in Brazil. And so I thought, okay, I don't think I want to do that. I was trying to look back at like nonprofit work, and no doors were opening for me. And so I was back to going to daily mass. I would ride my bike to this church, and I was talking to my spiritual director, and I was like, what if I should just like put all my energy, I'm spending so much time and energy trying to find a job, and I'm making some money on Etsy, doing my calligraphy. Really, at the time, there was a hole in the market in terms of beautiful Catholic design, like modern Catholic design. So much of it, it was outdated. No one, and what was happening in the Christian markets just wasn't happening in our Catholic space. And that was when I met the woman who started Blessed Is She. And so I was the designer for Blessed Is She while doing my own thing. I was like doing wedding things in LA. And then, so share, I'm like, wait, we got to go back to my story. I mean, this is my story of like all of it. I sometimes look at my business and think, how in the world do I have a Catholic business? Like, who let me do this? Like, I have no theology degree, and all I have is this knowledge that for me, it always comes back to the way that I have been able to find light and hope in the church. And no matter how many times like I get in the way of my own self or have these imperfections, God is still there. And it isn't about being perfect or, for so long, I really tried to pretend to be someone because I thought that was the only way that you could be Catholic, or you had to hit like certain checkpoints, And what I have found in my growth is like, if I can just show up as myself, then that is what God asks of me. And so I ended up meeting my husband through some friends in AA, some mutual friends. We met at a party, and he's not Catholic. My husband is not Catholic. And one of the funnier stories is it's like, I don't know. Novenas are funny because I really have to fight against this idea that like, I'm going to get something, right? Like, so I did the St. Andrew novena. I had this idea to be a calligrapher. I ended up making a really good living as being a calligrapher that has built my business. And then but I had a terrible experience dating. I mean, dating was very challenging for me in Los Angeles, just like, navigating the dating world. And all my friends were getting married. I really felt like I was missing the boat. I was very depressed. I was never going to find anyone ever, is what I told my therapist the week before I met my husband. And so it was going to be the 100th anniversary of Fatima. And I will admit, I did not know the story of Fatima. I knew nothing about her. I continually am learning about all of these things in our faith. But I thought, if a novena was going to work, it would probably be for this 100th anniversary. I'm just going to give it a shot. I'm just going to do one more novena, and maybe Mary wants to like be known through this. So I prayed this novena, and I forgot. I mean, I was diligently praying it, but I wasn't thinking about it in my day-to-day kind of thing. And I went to my friend's housewarming party, and I started talking to this really handsome guy. And then we went out the next week, and then I looked back at the date and I was like, oh, that was May 13th. That was the last day of the novena. And he became my husband. And so I cannot talk about him without talking about Our Lady of Fatima. We ended up getting married on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, not because I was like even realizing it was a Sunday, or a Saturday. It was the only date available at the venue, like a year out in LA. And so Mary has really cared for me in all that I kind of in my journey. And so a lot of my artwork comes through from that. And she has, I think that there is something about her that I hear a lot of people say, but there's something so approachable about Mary. And when I look back at Heart's Home as Mary at the foot of the cross, and of this compassion that I long for my own self and for others, and to really be in this world. And now I have a business called Be a Heart, which is a silly business name, but you can't even do it without like recognizing that is in everything that I'm doing, in all of the work that I'm doing, in my motherhood, in being a wife, is that call to really be Christ's heart in the world. And Mary shows me the way to that. And so when I look back at all of these touchstone points in my life, to recognize that she was there, the college that I went to in Indianapolis is called Marian College. In Brazil, our village was called, translates to English, the Christmas Farm. And we fashioned ourselves and Mary at the foot of the cross. I have a big devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe. That was my first. She was my first gateway to really praying the rosary as a teenager, and we visited the basilica. And Fatima brings the light and sun into our world, and so, now I am imperfectly Catholic and trying to really live a life of the gospel and I don't really want to entirely be an example because, that's difficult to do. But if God can use me to show other women that we don't have to be another kind of woman to show up as a faithful Catholic, that we are in our baptism, we are Catholic, and we can show our children our faith in how we personally live it out, and the ways that prayer can change us, in not just what we're asking for, but how we live our suffering, that we can seek help in our mental health needs, and that it isn't contrary to our belief, like that we can use different resources to help navigate this, because it is hard. It's hard in 2022. There's a lot coming at us. And that, it's not your grandmother's religion anymore. Really, we're modern. We're modern women who have found hope and light. And when I'm going through a difficult time, which I is more frequently than others, maybe, women hold that space for me to say, like, there is light at the end of this tunnel and it will be here again. And I'll kind of end at this. The idea of the cycle of life, death, and resurrection, and learning for me that it wasn't just something that happened once. This grand, beautiful, life-altering way that we see from Christ is really an example to us of what happens in our daily life, and the rhythm that it's not always going to be like a high where like life is great and joyful. There are dips in these deaths that we go through, and then there's the resurrection on the other side. And as I am learning how to allow that in my life, I can draw close to Christ in it. And if we can then hold the hope when we're living in a time of resurrection for someone who's living through the suffering of death, and be in community together, that is where Christ lives. And so, I know that my story in a lot of ways has just begun, and it is exciting to think about the future in that way of, what surprises does God have for me and for you. It is my story of a lot of grace and forgiveness and kindness. And he doesn't just have that for me, but for each one of us. And it's about turning our hearts, as I was praying in the beginning, the prayer of really turning our hearts to who God calls us individually to be. And my spiritual director always says that, like, always becoming more who God already created me as. And that's our life's work, really.
Yes, Erica, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. When you first started, I didn't say this because I was like, wait, that could be a little bit manipulative. But I was going to say, I can already sense the gift of openness in you. And that is a profound blessing. And I believe that not only will you touch lives deeply from sharing today, but in general. And I so appreciate that you spoke both to mental illness and to addiction, because so often those go hand in hand, and
Mm-hmm.
either intentionally or unintentionally, the way that you shared about those shows so beautifully that dynamic between them. Because like you said in the beginning, with the depression that you felt when you first went to college, with the anxiety that you felt, and then with that first drink, you were like, oh, of
Yeah.
course, this is why people do this.
Yeah.
And then because of probably, like, for lack of a better way to put it, I'm not an expert, but like almost like the disease being dormant in your body, that, it'll suck you in. And like
Mm-hmm.
you said, you'd say to yourself time and time again, like, okay, I drank yesterday, I'm not going to drink today, or today I'm not going to drink as much. And even just that image of you waking up by a man that you didn't know, I appreciate you naming that so much, because another thing that you named that was going through my own heart and mind before you said it was shame, like shame and guilt, and how driven we can be by those
Mm-hmm.
things. And yet here you went to reconciliation, which is a glorious invitation for all of us. Father Michael, my goodness, like, you talked in the beginning about looking back on our lives and seeing God at work and God present. And we prayed about God always being present. And when you walked into that room, or whatever you walked into for reconciliation, what kept coming to me was, oh my goodness, Jesus was so present there. And Jesus was like there as Jesus, and Jesus was there working through Father
Mm-hmm.
Michael, who still is so at work in your life.
Yeah.
I mean, that is such a testimony to how one human and the choice of one human can change another's life so profoundly by loving into another life. And he was so patient with you, because
Yeah.
at some
He
point
still
he
is.
said to
So
you, like, hey, do you think that maybe this drinking thing could be a problem? And
yeah.
you're like, no, I'm good.
No. And he still met with me for months,
Yes, he did
I'm
not
like,
turn
all
away. He
right.
didn't push it. He wasn't, I mean, I'm just hearing like loving invitation,
Mm-hmm.
like we talked about the Holy Spirit, not judgy. Like, he didn't
Yeah.
come at you in a way that you couldn't hear it. My husband and I were just talking about this because he feels called to talk to a younger person about something. And this is exactly what we were talking about, is like, how do you say something in a way and in a moment that the Holy Spirit's inviting you, and in a way that the person can receive? Because it's
Yeah.
not about us getting something off our backs or us getting some catharsis, but it's about inviting someone, hopefully lovingly and deeper, into communion with the
Mm-hmm.
Lord and the face of truth and honesty. And so, Erica, this is a glorious invitation for us to be this barren with the Lord, to be this much ourselves, to be this authentic, because God already sees it all. God
Yeah.
already knows it all. God knows us more fully than we know ourselves. But I hope for everyone listening that we're all able to be this honest with ourselves and with the Lord. And like you said, Erica, it's not that God is trying to make us into a gift that we are already not.
Yeah.
God is helping us to pull back the layers and to reveal the gift that God already created us to be, so that we can be in God's sacred heart, Jesus'
Mm-hmm.
sacred heart. And so, like you have named your business, so that we can be a heart, be the
Mm-hmm.
heart of the Lord to one another. I want to thank you so much for this beautiful testimony. And Erica, are you comfortable if somebody is struggling with addiction or with mental illness, or can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm always happy to receive an email. My email is at erica@beaheart.com. I mean, really, for me, like, I tend to point people to Alcoholics Anonymous. I have seen it change lives, mine and my husband's and many of my friends. And finding that community, like, in person, and you just to find a meeting. There's a lot going on online now because of the pandemic, but finding a group in your community, I really can't stress that enough. And then also for mental health, I going to see people. My husband is also a therapist, so finding people, uh, I'll just give this because sometimes someone may want this and they don't want to email me. But really, what I do is, if you have insurance, I always start on the insurance portal, because the last thing that we need is therapy to be a financial burden. And I always look for the person who is closest, because I have found in difficult times that if I have to go too far, I'm also not going to go. So I try to find someone really close, and then really praying and putting, before you reach out to people, of saying, okay, Lord, help me find the right person who can walk through this with me. And finding therapy and really medicine that is prescribed. That's not, having to use alcohol, kind of battling all of this myself too. And then the last thing I'll say is that we may get questions about, like, how do you find a spiritual director? We get that a lot in my own community. And not every priest is made in their own being who God made them to be a spiritual director, like in that very specific way. So, if you feel connected to someone, you can ask. I think a lot of parish priests are overburdened, and so they don't have time to do that. But I also think that parishes have lists. Usually you can, like, email the front office and say, like, do you have a list of spiritual directors in the area or people in our community? Because people are trained to do that. And it is a really amazing resource that we have in the church, to walk us through, like, that both and experience. So
Thank you. That's a
yeah.
glorious answer and so helpful. And I love how Father Michael, talked to you about, and you talk very practically, because I believe so deeply in the practical as well. Like,
Yes.
there is a lot to say for just getting practical advice. And I love that
Yeah.
myself when I'm given it. So thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
And in closing, real quick, because we just have a couple more minutes, do you have a favorite saint?
So the saint that I have chosen for my business, because she's kind of my favorite, to inspire me in this time, and Father Michael taught me about her, but Saint Jane Frances de Chantal was a mother and a wife, and her husband died, and she had kids, and she wanted to enter the religious life, and they denied her. And so she started her own for people who were kind of women who were outcasts from other communities. And the reason why I really love her is that she had this prayer that was like a simple meditation to do. It's one of my favorites, that she would imagine herself each morning laying in an ocean or like a body of water, and the water supports you, if you're laying on your back. And she would imagine each of her worries, or the things like her burdens, as a little buoy, and she would imagine herself letting go of it, and the water, which is God who holds us and holds our things, would pull it away. And then what happens with water and things in it is that they float back. So the next day it would be back, and she would have to keep letting it go. And then until the point that worry was gone. And so for me, it really is like, it's not a one and done kind of thing. We talk in AA, like, you can't take a shower for one day and have it keep you clean in, even the next day or in 4 days. It's something that you have to continually revisit and do. And so our prayer life is much like that we can't just say, like, take this from me and expect it to immediately be gone, but it is the practice of letting go and letting God care for us. And so, so I love her for that.
Thank you so much. And you gave me a twofer there because you know my other question is about your
Oh,
favorite
yeah.
prayer. And that is really glorious. Thank you so much. And I am unfamiliar with her, so I look forward to learning more. Erica, thank you so much for being with
Thank you
us.
for
What a
having me.
blessing.
Thank you so
And
much.
thank you everyone else for being here as well. This is a glorious invitation for us to return to God time and time again, for God to resurrect our hearts and resurrect our beings so that we can always draw closer to Him. You can find many, many more faith-filled podcasts at mamasinspirit.com. Come follow Mamas in Spirit on Facebook and Instagram, and can't wait to be together again next time. This is Lindy Wynn with Mamas in Spirit. May God bless you and yours always.